Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of the Test Guild Automation Podcast. Today we'll be talking with Nikolay all about his upcoming event, Testing for Good. Also, he's an automation expert. He's done a lot in the community for many, many years, so I'm excited to jump in to see what's new with automation as well. If you don't know, Nikolay is a self-driven SDAT on a lifelong mission to create profound change in the IT world, which he's definitely achieved, especially as founder of UltimateQA.com, which is one of the go-to websites designed to train individuals in testing best practices. He's also a senior solution architect at Sauce Labs, one of our awesome sponsors, so excited about that as well. And he's been voted one of the top automation engineers in the world multiple years in a row by techbeacon.com. He's contributed to many books such as Continuous Testing for DevOps Professionals and co-created Sauce Bindings OSS. Don't know much about that. Maybe we'll dive into that as well. And he's spoken at multiple conferences like the Automation Guild, Test.js, and SauceCon. So he's also an animal lover like myself. So he's a great guy. Can't wait to get into it with him. You don't want to miss this episode. Check it out. Hey, Nikolay, welcome back to the Guild.
Hey, Joe, thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
Awesome. Same. Before we get into it, I gave you a pretty good bio, but is there anything I missed in your bio that you want the Guild to know more about?
No, you gave me an amazing bio.
Cool. It's been a while. I just checked. Seems like 2 years ago you were on the show. So, yeah, what's new? What you been up to? I know you're working at Sauce Labs. Just curious to know maybe what's new, what's out there, what you've been working on.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, still working at Sauce Labs. I'm getting a lot more into like developer advocacy stuff. So trying to grow bigger communities around automated testing and open source, that kind of stuff. So that was one of the reasons why I actually came here, was to talk about testing for good. We can jump into that in a moment. On a personal level, I've been doing a lot of stuff with JavaScript and just like improving my skills as a front-end developer, learning really the process of building a web application and taking it all the way to production and releasing it with services such as like Netlify, for example. And so yeah, that's been also really fun and really exciting to learn all the ins and outs of web development.
So why are you doing that? You're a tester. Why are you delving into actually development?
Oh, that's a great point. Well, I believe that yes, even though I am a tester, if I want to be much better at doing testing, I need to understand how to do it from start to finish, right? So testing is not only black box testing, right? We don't want to only test from a black box perspective where we have no idea about the working internals. As testers, we can be a lot more empowered, a lot better at our jobs when we know the insides of the code as well. And we, for example, know that if I want to test a login form, I don't necessarily have to do it through the front end. I can do a web request, get back a token, drop the token in the browser, and now perform different kinds of operations. Or even click a button using something as simple as a component test that will run in milliseconds and will still perform the same exact operations if I were to spin up a browser and click a button through something like Selenium or Cypress, for example.
Nice. So it sounds like rather than just create an end-to-end test and think, okay, this is the best approach, it sounds like since you have development skills now, hey, maybe I can push this further left into the actual developer doing more of these types of tests. Is that basically how it turns out a lot?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so much more than just end-to-end tests, right? And end-to-end tests tend to be the longest to run and the hardest to write. They take the most amount of code. It's getting better. Technology is actually getting way better at this, and end-to-end testing is becoming very reliable and useful. However, there's still much more to end-to-end, much more to testing than end-to-end tests. I've actually found a great balance of testing, especially for like front-end web applications, like in common JavaScript libraries like React or Next.js and so on. A balance of using some end-to-end tests, like a handful of those, combined with a lot of visual testing, So I'll render my applications in different resolutions, especially desktop and mobile, always catching so many visual discrepancies that those tend to come up all the time when I'm doing visual testing. And then I'll throw in some like maybe component tests in there or some snapshot tests with something like Jest, for example, and that will make my testing extremely robust. And I don't even have to write too much code to do all of that testing. And so all those skills that I learned as a kind of transitioning, shifting more to the left, have been super useful in helping me with that.
Nice. So you mentioned component testing. For the folks that don't know, what is component testing? I think component testing, if you're an old-time tester, you think of Mercury. They used to have business process testing, which was component testing, which is this is not. So maybe you can maybe drop a little knowledge on us of how you define what component testing is.
Yeah, for sure. Great question. I think even I don't have a full. I think the definition for component testing through the industry is still kind of muddy, but I'll tell you what I think. I think of component testing as unit testing for the front end. So the actual like JavaScript, HTML that's put together. So for you, the easiest way to think about it is a button. You would have like an HTML component, which is like a button, and it has some attributes. It might have some styling to it as well. Well, you can interact and even render that component individually just by itself. You don't need an entire application running. And so you can just perform testing, like unit testing on that HTML component, and then get all the advantages of unit testing and then all the coverage of the browser stuff without having to spin up a server and actually render the application.
Very cool. And so obviously it saves you a lot of time, and you can iterate over it really quickly while the developers are testing. I guess you could just run these quick component tests almost simultaneously.
Yeah, exactly. They run in like milliseconds. You don't need to start anything, so you can literally, if you have access to the files, you can just test on the files, and whatever's there is what's going to get rendered in the browser. So you don't have that also concern of, oh, I'm exercising a function, but how's that function going to perform when I link it to HTML? And so, you're testing the exact button that would be rendered in the UI.
Great. So, when I think of you, I think of a C# expert for some reason, C# developer. So I just kind of not like caught off guard, but why JavaScript? I thought you were like C# really tried and true.
Yeah, for sure, Joe. I feel like that's hard for me to still shake that C# expertise persona. It's how I entered the industry with UltimateQA. Pretty much, I was doing everything in C#, which was at the time when I was working at my previous two employers. Everything was done in C#, so that's where all my knowledge came from, and that's what I was teaching and sharing my knowledge right in C#. Working for Sauce Labs, I have to support all types of customers, and so primarily the two programming languages that most customers uses Java and JavaScript. And so I had to pick both of those up. So nowadays, really, I do most of my stuff, I would say, in JavaScript and Java as well. And so C Sharp, unfortunately, it's not as popular as the other two, so I don't get to use it as often. Hence, now you don't see me doing much around C Sharp, just because not enough time to do so many programming languages and so many technologies, especially in JavaScript. They have like hundreds of technologies that come up every day.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I love how, because you work for a large company, they collect all this data, so you probably know what a majority of people are using. So besides languages, so it sounds like you said JavaScript and Java. What's maybe the third one? Is it Python? That'd be the most popular?
Yeah, Python. In terms of, so yeah, working for Sauce Labs, right? We run tons of automated tests, so Appium, Selenium. So that's where we get the data from. And so yeah, Python is number three, and then it's like Ruby and C Sharp. Ruby kind of has been on the downturn in terms of test execution, and then C Sharp is kind of stagnant, maybe going up a little bit. But I do notice that at least that's in terms of front end browser automation, right? I think Sauce App just hit like 4 billion tests or 5 billion tests recently. So many tests I can't even keep track anymore. But at least from the entire community, I noticed that C Sharp and .NET ecosystem is growing, especially because they did go open source and now they can run on Windows and Mac and Linux. So that of course enables way more people to be able to use C Sharp.
So this is a dumb question. I guess it depends. It's all how you develop it. But is there one language that tends to be more stable that you see over those billions of tests that run? Like, oh, the ones that are the most stable tend to be JavaScript, and maybe because it's developers that are actually creating them. I don't know if you have that type of data or not.
And very, very cool question, Joe. So when you say stable, what's your definition of stable?
Stable is, when it fails for a reason, not because it was poorly written or has bad weights or things like that.
Yeah. Let's see. So I can say that from my experience, I don't have the data to back it up. My feeling is that the JavaScript tech stacks tend to be the most stable and the fastest. My thoughts behind that are, yeah, a lot of the JavaScript code tends to be written by developers. The JavaScript test code tends to live in the same repository as the software that the test code is testing. And so that just makes everything much easier. It allows for smarter testing and for faster testing and more stable testing. And then also, for example, we, at least in Sauce Labs, we have, um, well, but let me not talk about that for a second. Also, the other thing that makes it easy, right, is for example, when you think of deploying a web application, right? As you deploy a web application through the pipeline, and it's a, let's say, a front end web application, you need to build that application, and then it turns into some kind of code that's running in your browser, right? You can build it and run it on like localhost 3000. If your test code is in the same place, once you build the app, you can just run your test code against that localhost 3000. And so everything is like right there on the same machine, super close, super fast. And I think that lends itself to the stability. While, for example, now if you have to take a programming language that's not the same as the software that you're developing, let's say Java, for example, now you have to run it in a separate pipeline, and you can't really execute tests against localhost because what are you going to be sitting in one pipeline where you're building? What are you going to be in sitting waiting there for until you finish that build? So you have to build and deploy that, and only then can you run your Java test. And so that, of course, introduces latency, introduces, as a result, makes the test longer and a little bit more brittle. And so the other thing that I've seen is in Sauce Apps, for example, for all the JavaScript stuff, we have source control, and source control, basically the way it works, and I hope that a lot of libraries transition to this mechanism as well. The way it works is it basically takes your test code, we upload it to a VM, and then we run the tests on the VM with the browser. So it's almost like everything executing in one environment without having to travel. For example, me being in Atlanta right now, running my tests from Atlanta to California, where their data center is, and back, and then testing the application in that manner. Everything can run together, and again, making the test faster and more stable as a result. Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. That's great insight. So I guess along those lines, then, when I think of JavaScript testing and automation, I think of Cypress, and I know Selenium supports it. A lot of tools support it. So, do you see in popularity with JavaScript, if someone's a JavaScript developer, what types of tools they tend to use more? Is it Selenium? Is it Cypress? Is it something else? Is it a suite of tools that they use depending on what their needs are?
That's a good question. So, in terms of developers, they will typically use something like a Cypress, or Playwright has been really hot recently. Um, and I would say they don't do too much end-to-end testing as far as I've seen. They'll do a lot of lower level testing. So They'll do a lot of like visual component testing. They will do unit tests. They'll use a lot of like Jest for unit tests, for example, or they'll use like component tests. So I think because Cypress is like older to the game, they're kind of like the OG in the end-to-end testing space in JavaScript. They tend to be used more often, but I also see Playwright growing in popularity. I'm actually here in Atlanta to do a demo for a customer with Cypress and Playwright because they want to compare the two. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been hearing a lot more about Playwright for sure. It seems like it's becoming one of the leading solutions out there for what it is. So talking about that, I think I actually, not that I stalk you, but I do look at your social media often, and I noticed you've been you went to something in Europe on I think it was the Test Automation Summit, some of the masterminds behind the open source. So I don't know, behind closed doors, what do you all talk about for automation solutions? Do you say Playwright is going to go down, or you think it's going up, or what was that summit all about? And maybe some key findings, maybe that you might be able to share with the audience here.
Yeah, sure. By the way, Joe, you can stalk me on social media anytime. I welcome it. It's a term of endearment. Stalk me and bring your friends. Um, so yeah, about the test automation summit. So it was an amazing event organized by Titus Fortner and Diego Molina from Selenium community. They're the primary developers for Selenium. And so the kind of purpose behind that meeting was there are so many open source projects that exist that are built around the Selenium and WebDriver ecosystem. Projects like Selenide, Codecept, WebDriver IO, Christian Broman was there. So many of these projects built around open source standards. And so we were trying to figure out how do we get more contributors to open source, because open source developers typically are not paid. They do it because they love the project and they do it in their free time, versus paid projects such as Cypress or Playwright, where, for example, Playwright has a team of developers at Microsoft working for them that are paid to work on Playwright every single day. And so how do we get more contributions to all of these projects? For example, I contributed to Atata, which is a .NET framework. It's like a page object wrapper around Selenium, making test automation much easier. Very amazing project, done really well. The guy Yevgeny that runs it, yeah, very well tested, very well laid out project. So if you're in C# looking for a page object framework that you can use, grab Atata for yourself. And so in terms of some key takeaways, well, some key takeaways are that one thing we all have to consider whenever we're making a tool is, for example, open source tools are building on open source standards. And so if we're creating a community that is more collaborative, right? For example, all the browser vendors to open up their browsers and allow automation protocols that are common and easier for the entire world, then we all benefit. So that's really important to think about, that we want to be, regardless of which tool we're using, which browsers, we want to be more collaborative than less, because then everybody benefits from more collaboration and more openness. While, for example, something like Playwright doesn't seem to want to be very collaborative. They almost want to lock down the ecosystem for themselves. They generate their own browsers so that they can run the tests in them, and they control the code. And of course, the code is all controlled by Microsoft. And I'm not saying that is necessarily a bad thing. It could be a great thing because it introduces a lot of innovation, but it's something to think about, that it could potentially now be moving into the direction of something that we've had in the past. I know you're very familiar with, like, Joe's, like an HP QTP kind of product, where there's one company that controls that, and you're, as an engineer, dependent on them, and you have to do what they basically say, and you got to pay them a fee in order to use the product. So just again, these are not inherently good or bad things. It's just considerations that we have to take as we're choosing products and we're choosing our tools. And Playwright is a wonderful tool. What I love about it is that it supports all the primary programming languages. For example, Cypress is only in JavaScript, so you're a developer in JavaScript. You can only use JavaScript. But for all of us other engineers that don't use it, that don't use JavaScript, we can't use Cypress. But Playwright does Java, .NET, JavaScript, and Python. So it's like they have you covered, and it's the same API. So you, as a tester, you can pick it up, and it's a really good tool.
Awesome. So, I know there's a lot of different topics, a lot of hot things going on in the testing space. So there's a lot of events going on, and I also noticed as I was stalking you, you're putting on an event called Testing for Good. I thought maybe you could dive in a little quick. What is Testing for Good?
Yeah, sure, Joe. Yeah, so Testing for Good is an event that I came up with about a year ago. I'm always trying to think of like how I can serve the testing community better. And I'm also a uh, co-lead on the environmental ERG at Sauce Labs. And so I was like, ooh, why don't I put the two together and create some kind of an event where we enable people in great automated testing practices, and then we try to give back to the community. So the purpose of Testing for Good is to enable amazing test automation while creating a more equitable society. And so I started it about a year ago. It was just me. Um, ran like a JavaScript workshop where I was hands-on. People join for like 2, 3 hours, do hands-on coding. You do exercises. So at the end, instead of just watching a theoretical talk and maybe leaving with a repo, you actually leave with hands-on coding knowledge that you've applied, that you've learned something, and can now take to your workplace and hopefully start using at your workplace immediately. So that was me, had like 130 or 40 people join that workshop, seemed to be successful. People loved it. The workshop was free. We raised like over $4,000 for Black Girls Code. And I'm like, cool, let's do this and make it bigger and better. And so now we're coming up on our fifth event. It's going to be happening in October 18th through the 20th. And so the Testing for Good event is going to be held on October 18th through the 20th. We got 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We got 5 amazing instructors. And let me tell you, so 5 amazing instructors teaching in the 2 primary programming languages that most testers use, Java and JavaScript. In Java, we're going to have 4 different workshops: API testing with Java by Bas Dijkstra, crafting a test framework by Titus Fortner from Selenium, mobile testing with Ayal Yovel, he's a solutions architect at Sauce Labs, and web testing by Chris Eccleston, he's also a solution architect at Sauce Labs. And then for JavaScript, we have 3 workshops. We have end-to-end component testing with Cypress by Gleb Bakhmutov, from probably one of the best Cypress engineers in the world. And then we got web testing and API testing by me. I'm going to run 2 different workshops. So we're going to have numerous times that these workshops will be available over the 3 days. We try to make it EU and US friendly. So if you're in US, you'll probably find the time one day that works for you. And if you're in EU, you'll probably find the time on another day that works for you. Just we try to be as inclusive as possible. Workshops are absolutely free. Anyone can join. The workshops will be recorded. You'll do hands-on coding in whatever technology stack that you want. And then we're going to be asking for donations. All the donations are going to go to Environmental Working Group. If you're not familiar with an environmental working group, they're a community of 30 million strong, working to protect our environmental health by changing industry standards. Since 1993, the Environmental Working Group has shined a spotlight on outdated legislation, harmful agricultural practices, and industry loopholes that pose a risk to our health and the health of our environment. So, being a test automation enthusiast and an environmental ERG co-lead, it brings my two passions together into a single event, and hopefully super valuable for the entire testing community and the environment.
Yeah, and it really is Testing for Good, so that is awesome. So, for a workshop, Do you have anything like this? Do you have like certain levels someone needs to be in order to participate? Is it going to be by beginner, intermediate, advanced? Do they have to have something already installed on their machines? Like, how does that all work? If someone's wondering, oh, this sounds great, but I don't have enough knowledge in JavaScript to do this or whatever.
Yeah, that great question. So maybe I'll talk about about each individual workshop. So I can tell you for my workshops, you can be a beginner and just jump into it. We host, most of us, at least at Sauce Labs, we host our workshops in Gitpod. And so Gitpod is like it's like a virtual machine. It's like a Docker container that can run in your browser. I'm actually a Gitpod ambassador, so shout out to them. They're awesome. So it's basically you can have a GitHub account, and then you can open your GitHub source code in the browser, and then it's going to spin up an environment, and you can code and run stuff in that environment. It makes it really easy. So you don't need anything installed. You'll be coding in the browser for at least my workshops, and those are beginner. Actually, almost all the workshops will be beginner, and you'll be taken from beginner to like expert level skills through the workshops. Maybe actually all of them. Maybe crafting a test framework by Titus, because it's crafting a test framework. You probably need some programming experience, because you can't just start as a newbie and already jump into framework. So there may be more intermediate with some programming experience, but regardless, I'm sure everyone will learn a lot in every single one of these workshops.
Absolutely. And where can folks go to register for that?
Everyone can join at bit.ly/TFG-October OCT-22. And I'm sure, Joe, you can link to it as well. But
I'll have a link for that in the show notes for sure.
Yeah, perfect. And then you can, of course, Google just testing for good workshops October, and that should come up in Google. But Joe will link you, and then you can always reach out to me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and I'll share the link as well.
Awesome stuff as always. Okay, Nikolay, before we go, is there one piece of actual advice you can give to someone to help them with their automation testing efforts, to help them test for the good? And what's the best way to find or contact you?
One piece of actionable advice I would recommend is to try and shift your testing more to the left by learning some of the skills that developers do on a daily basis, such as building an application, deploying it. It'll help you to be a better tester if that's what you're interested in, and you'll learn some important skills that will overall enhance your testing. And you can find me on Twitter at Nikolay_A00. You can find me on LinkedIn, Nikolay Advolodkin, and I release a ton of, all free tutorials on YouTube, UltimateQA, and also you can of course find me on my website, UltimateQA.com. And there you'll see all my blog posts and my tutorials. And again, I always try to do everything for free and help the community as much as I can.
Thanks again for your automation awesomeness. The links to everything of value we covered in this episode, head on over to testguild.com/A417. And while you're there, make sure to click on the Try for Free Today link under the exclusive sponsor section to learn all about Sauce Labs' awesome products and services. And if the show has helped you in any way, why not rate it and review it in iTunes? Reviews really help in the rankings of the show, and I read each and every one of them. So that's it for this episode of the Test Guild Automation Podcast. I'm Joe, and my mission is to help you succeed with creating end-to-end, full-stack automation awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Test Guild Automation Podcast. Head on over to testguild.com for full show notes, amazing blog articles, and online testing conferences. Don't forget to subscribe to the Guild to continue your testing journey.